2 days ago, Flight 55342 crashed in Washington, D.C. Can you let us know about some of the preliminary investigation that's occurred?
Yeah, sure. This was a night operation, which is significant in this situation because it was a see and avoid. Night operations are different from the daytime. What seems obvious to most of us, it's harder to see at night, but lighting is different. The pilots on the helicopter may have had night vision goggles in use. We know they had them, whether they were using them or not, as we'll learn. But between the lights, the irregular landscape, the demands being put on the pilots in that close environment, it leads to distraction, and it can lead to pilot error.
Can you tell us a little bit about the federal aviation regulations as they relate to see and avoid and what a pilot's responsibility is?
Absolutely. In this situation, the air traffic controller specifically asked the helicopter pilot, do you have the traffic in sight? The helicopter pilot acknowledged and actually requested permission to go visual as opposed to on instruments. And by accepting that clearance, it shifted the responsibility technically from the air traffic controller to the pilot.
There have been some reports recently that there was an air corridor which the helicopter was supposed to be following and certain height restrictions with regards to where the helicopter was supposed to be. Can you discuss that?
Yes, that particular corridor, obviously a very tight window. We're talking about extremely busy and extremely small airspace for the volume of operations there. And so everybody has close tolerances on what's permissible as far as direction laterally and as far as altitude. It's my understanding at this point, and we'll get more clarification as this investigation continues, that this helicopter was limited to 200 feet above ground level, or in this particular situation, 200 feet above the level of the river. And it may have been as high as 300 feet. That normally would not be a significant difference if you're flying at altitude. 100 feet one way or another usually is not a problem. But when you're flying directly under the landing path of aircraft, at 100 feet can make a difference, and in this case obviously did.
A lot of people have been speculating as to the cause of the accident early on. Can you talk about how important it is to wait for the NTSB investigation to occur and to look at other potential causes of the crash, such as systems in the helicopter or systems in the airplane that may have played a role in this crash?
Yes, absolutely. And you'll hear it from the chair of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. They are very careful to say, don't jump to conclusions. We have a complete investigation that needs to be done. There'll be an early preliminary report with some of the basic facts as far as root causes, and there can be multiple root causes, including procedural, the design of the airspace corridor that we've talked about, the flight training scenario going on inside the helicopter, the awareness, situational awareness of the airplane pilot, and as you mentioned, potential equipment failures. So some seem more likely than others at this point, but we can't rule out, and the investigators, the official government investigators, won't rule out anything until it's ironclad.
Mark, tell us a little bit about your past experience in aviation litigation and accidents, and you think that you can bring experience to bear to this accident in Washington, D.C.
Yes, I'm a multi-engine rated commercial pilot, and I'm a flight instructor. And I think in this particular situation, now that we know that this in fact was a training flight on board the helicopter, I've spoken to attorney groups and pilot groups about that peculiar environment and training where people are supposed to be learning how to operate at the margins of their capability and the capability of their aircraft. And in that training environment, the student may be nervous because they're being observed. The instructor may be distracted because they're watching their student to evaluate them as opposed to looking out the window. So in this case, it was a clear see and avoid situation, and there's an obligation, regardless of all these other stressors or factors, the pilots still have as a primary obligation the duty to see and avoid other aircraft.
Tell us a little bit about the human factors related to not so much the people involved in the accident, but the client. What's been your experience with regards to representing individuals and families that have suffered a tragedy such as this?
Yeah, well, it's obviously unspeakable. It is unexpected. It is horribly tragic, and no one's prepared for it. And uh, most people don't know what to do. I mean, who do I call to get some sort of accountability? And knowing who is an aviation attorney that has experience, who has litigated these cases, taken them to jury trials to determine who's at fault, who's responsible, where does accountability lie. It's hard to know that, and particularly people that are in a grieving process have a hard time making those decisions. That's why, we try to let people know that we bring to bear our experience and obviously the compassion from the point of view of we've seen and we've heard and we feel this ourselves. As pilots ourselves, we can see ourselves in this same situation. We train to avoid accidents, but we know that's always a lurking danger out there. And so we do have a safe system in general. Accidents are rare. That's why we trust the airlines when we get on the plane that they're going to get us safely to our destination. But that danger is always there. And we, because we understand the process from early investigation through the litigation, through the sorting out of all the possibilities, to finally getting some sort of compensation or recognition of the responsibility. Sometimes it's not easy. In this case, we have the U.S. Army and we have American Airlines primarily. We may find that there are other entities involved in how this came about, the federal government's air traffic control system. But often, and this is incredibly unfortunate for people who are in the situation, the families who've lost loved ones, find out that there's a dispute going on. Whose fault was this? Who's going to accept responsibility? Who's going to pay for the loss? And sometimes, literally, it ends up in a jury trial when they deny responsibility. Those who are responsible but don't want to be held accountable.
What's your experience trying these types of cases?
Well, I've tried many, and my experience is that the juries can amazingly grasp very sophisticated concepts of air traffic control and engineering and aeronautics and human factors and all these things. But it's our job to lay that story out for the jury to understand how it happened, why it happened, and ultimately what are the consequences that have resulted from the wrongdoing, if assuming there's wrongdoing. And that's what we know how to do. And there are a lot of lawyers, but there are very few experienced aviation trial lawyers who not only have the trial experience, but also the aviation qualifications and practical experience of flying the airplane.